So you might have seen in the news recently some sudden geopolitical escalations emerging around West Africa. Two coups, one successful, one narrowly thwarted, have erupted within a single week. And together, they reveal something far more consequential than just simply two isolated power grabs. But why now? And what's going on here? You see, in Guinea-Bissau, soldiers have stormed a government building, detained the president and opposition candidates, sealed borders, imposed a curfew, and announced on state television that a new military command will take over and control the country. Conversely, in Benin, long regarded as one of Africa's safest and stable democracies, another group of soldiers appeared on national TV announcing that the president had been removed, the constitution suspended, and borders closed. These events aren't disconnected. They're symptoms of a deeper transformation, because West Africa's most important regional bloc, known as ECOWAS, once capable of deterring coups across the region, is completely paralyzed, struggling to prevent state after state from sliding into political and economic chaos. And so that tells us something critical. Africa's coup wave hasn't just continued, it has entered a new phase. And it's in this video that I wanted to break down why these coups matter, what they're exposing about regional and institutions and power, and how they blend into the broader geopolitical disorder, the international disorder that we now live in. Stick around for this one. It's pretty important to know what it means for Ukraine, Europe, and other parts of the world.
This is The Global Gambit.
How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. And if you're new here, well, we look at the nexus of geopolitics, international relations, and economic statecraft, this time coming to you from just outside Rome. Now, much of the time we focus on Russia-Ukraine. However, we cannot and mustn't ignore other global events, including Africa, somewhere I have many fond memories of living and working firsthand. And moreover, since nothing happens in isolation, and you see, because if things escalate in West Africa, they raise tensions and risks to, say, Europe South, which therefore have a trickle-down effect, cause consequences for their attention and support to even Ukraine. Indeed, we must take a deeper look at these stories, beyond just the headlines, and understand structural shifts, power struggles, and how it happens. Which, in mind, brings me to, what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below, do you see relevance of this? How it plays into the broader international instability, institutional decay, great power competition? Let me know with a comment. But first, let's understand what has just happened here and what's going on. So, Guinea-Bissau, you've seen a clear takeover of gunfire erupting near the presidential palace. Civilians have fled, soldiers have appeared on state TV, forming the high military command for the restoration of order. Sounds pretty intense, but the president was detained, and his main rival, known as Fernando Diaz, was also detained. Borders sealed, checkpoints erected, and a curfew dramatically imposed. Observers from the AU, African Union, and ECOWAS said the election the coup had halted had been, quote, orderly and peaceful just hours before. So this wasn't an armed rebellion, it was an electoral process terminated by the army. In contrast, in Benin, a country praised for its stability. A group of soldiers declared that Talon, the current president, was removed, suspended the constitution, and closed the borders. Helicopters suddenly circling around the capital, gunfire being reported, and roadblocks everywhere. Officials later declared the coup was foiled, but this symbolism is unmistakable. Because if Benin can face a coup attempt, no coastal democracy is off limits. These two events aren't therefore simply disruptions. They're indicators that West Africa is entering an unfortunate period of systemic fragility. Now, to understand what's happening right now, we have to obviously look at recent historical events. You see, the Sahel has experienced multiple coups in the past few years. Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger have all fallen to military rule. These coups emerged from a mix of failing counterinsurgency campaigns, corruption, frustration with other countries' influences like France's security role. Then, the biggest obvious one that we know about, Sudan, when it descended into a devastating war between rival generals. So a dynastic military succession with democratic processes completely disregarded. And this now we enter a new phase. Guinea-Bissau and Benin show the coup wave is no longer confined to the Sahel states or states with failing security sectors. It is reaching coastal democracies, countries that, relatively speaking, are more stable. The key point here is that the geography of instability has and is continuing to expand. This is no longer a regional problem. It's a bit more of a systemic one, and if it reaches the likes of Ghana or even Nigeria, known as the giant of Africa, that could be absolutely critical for security concerns for Europe and further afield. A brief timeline shows how widespread this phenomenon has become. In Mali in 2020 and 21, mass protests, corruption, allegations, and insecurity triggered two coups, led by someone known as Colonel Assimi Goïta. Elections were delayed to 2077, later joined by Burkina Faso and Niger in just ditching ECOWAS. In 2021, both Guinea, not Guinea-Bissau, and Sudan saw their civilian rules collapse and entering power struggles, with Sudan's a full-scale civil war. Then in 2022, Burkina Faso happened. Two coups in 1 year, justified by worsening security. The rather famous Captain Ibrahim Traoré now rules. And then in Niger in 2023, the president was overthrown and ECOWAS threatened intervention, but nothing actually happened with it. And it was a turning point for the region's credibility as well as the organizations. Then in Gabon, there was a rather weird, disputed election which led to the country being shifted in power, but that was largely it. So the pattern of all this is that it's no longer episodic. It's structural. Institutions are weakening faster than they can stabilize themselves between the supposed pleasant and reliable transfer of power. For nearly 2 decades, ECOWAS was the continent's most effective regional security organization. It intervened decisively in other countries' situations in Sierra Leone, Liberia, and the Gambia. Its deterrent power was real, but today that authority has almost evaporated. In 2023, ECOWAS threatened force in Niger's junta, and it didn't restore democracy. But deadlines kept passing, nothing happened. And that was the moment when ECOWAS was considered rather washed up. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger withdrew entirely from the alliance of the Sahel states, a sort of rival bloc aligned more closely with Russia, another video that I've made in depth about that. Then there was the withdrawal of the West, or France. The US faces legal restrictions in supporting coup-born governments, and Europe has little appetite to intervene now. So this is where Russia and its Africa cause now provides security support, particularly in Mali. For juntas seeking consolidation rather than democracy, that's extremely attractive and useful. And bottom line, it means ECOWAS cannot deter coups anymore, and foreign governments and their militaries from getting involved. So the real story here isn't really about the coups are happening. It's about how their underlying mechanics are changing. Until recently, coups in Africa tended to follow a kind of familiar script: failing counterinsurgency operations, collapsing public services, loss of territorial control, and then the military step in claiming that they were the last line of order. But what we're seeing now is something more complex and dangerous. Guinea-Bissau fits the old pattern. This weak institution, a politicized military, entrenched corruption, and a history of drug trafficking networks entangled with the political elites. But Benin does not fit this traditional coup risk profile because it has strong institutions, relatively stable democratic transition, a reputation as a reliable Western power. In both cases, Guinea-Bissau's military acted during a contested election. Benin's mutineers justified their actions by claiming they were protecting the country from political mismanagement. Elections, instead of diffusing tensions, are triggering military intervention. So in the Sahel, militaries generally felt that they were stepping into a vacuum. In coastal states, militaries are starting to believe that they should arbitrarily deal with the politics, a far more dangerous mentality. It's not a wave, it's a normalization of military intervention, which spillovers into more and more countries getting the same ideas. The external environment has changed so dramatically that juntas today operate in a fundamentally different geopolitical ecosystem from those 10 to 20 years ago. Russia provides a ready-made post-coup sort of survival kit, security guarantees, elite protection, revenue opportunities through mining and arms deals, and a public narrative framing coups as anti-colonial liberation. For regimes fearing sanctions or isolation, this is insurance policy. Interestingly, though, there's also China. China doesn't endorse coups, but it also doesn't punish them. Its loans continue, its infrastructure projects rarely pause, and it maintains this diplomatic neutrality, or what I would say is indifference. So it offers juntas economic breathing room and sort of almost popularity, because the public thinks that the leaders are creating this. The West, though, has lost both leverage and appetite. The US is legally restricted from engaging diplomatically after coups. France's military role in the region has completely disintegrated. The EU is overstretched and politically divided, and the militaries know that they won't face decisive external pressure. So the ones that actually come to fill this void? It's the Gulf states. Countries like the UAE and Qatar increasingly bankroll political factions, provide arms quietly, offer investment in ports and logistics. We can see that happening in Somalia, in Sudan, in the eastern part of Africa. They don't defend democracy, they defend stability favorable to their interests, resulting in Africa becoming a far more multipolar arena where coups no longer result in any isolation, but only in realignment. And that's a massive structural shift. So what happens next? Well, this is where the stakes rise dramatically. The next 5 years in West Africa could reshape the entire security architecture of the region and, by extension, Europe and elsewhere. Rising coup risks in key states means several countries are entering succession crises or political transitions. Cameroon is facing a potential era where their long-standing president is no longer part of it. Congo, where you're seeing an aging leader result in rival networks mobilizing. Equatorial Guinea, long-standing dynastic tensions could erupt. And then Guinea as well face internal resistance that could escalate even further. These states have strategic ports, oil resources, and regional influence, making any instability far more consequential. So if ECOWAS cannot enforce norms like border security, that will weaken. Jihadist groups may expand southwards. Maritime piracy may return and surge, as we saw in 2011 in Somalia. And cross-border insurgencies may proliferate, leading to the absolute devastation and destruction that's happening in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The last time state capacity collapsed across multiple borders was in the early 2010s, and it directly contributed to the rise of ISIS in the Middle East. Is a comparison. Of course, Europe's security will be directly affected. Instability in coastal West Africa affects migration flows. It threatens LNG and shipping corridors. It increases risks of Russian naval access or basing agreements, something that we've been seeing a lot, obviously, with Putin's provocations. And it diverts EU diplomatic bandwidth away from Ukraine. This isn't therefore a distant issue. It's Europe's entire southern flank. What does it mean for NATO's focus? We may see the emergence of an authoritarian belt from the Atlantic to the Red Sea, weakened civilian governance, military acting as political arbiters, and Russia positioned as the sort of default security provider, all backed up by Chinese economics. This would fundamentally reshape Africa's relationship with the West and the entire international economy for decades. Ultimately, what we're seeing in Guinea-Bissau and Benin marks a new phase, one where military increasingly decide when civilian authority begins and ends, where elections become flashpoints rather than stabilizing moments, and where regional institutions no longer have strength to stop it. West Africa is entering a period of structural volatility, and the consequences will extend far beyond the region and short period of time. But if you like that, then do consider subscribing and letting me know in the comments below what you think. Don't forget to give the video a like, and I will see you all in the next one. If you want to support me further, you can find links in the description below to buy me coffee or become a channel member. Thanks for watching.